Someone asked this question a while ago, but why do people buy budget phones? Now, I get the idea that not everyone has the money for a good phone, which in some cases seem counterintuitive, but also how true is that statement? Well, let's try to figure that out. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and yes, this is social media, and no, I didn't know what the intro logo clip was going to be. But let's get started. So let's explain what a budget phone is. It's this. This is the Vivo Y01, a phone that cost over $300 on eBay, 150 euros according to GSM Arena, and $97 US on Amazon India. And honestly, it's a miserable phone. I'll go over it and somewhat review this phone throughout this video, but it also applies to the current climate of other budget phones. Looking at pricing in the US, generally you're going to be looking at like a $98 phone on Amazon, something like an A02s from Samsung. It is a better phone when compared to the Vivo, but definitely still a bad phone when compared to a Samsung S9. The Samsung S9 with 64 gigabytes of storage and a camera that can shoot 4K 60 frames per second video, all for around that $100 price point. But the biggest issue is that it's used. But the point of a budget phone is a little bit different, at least in my eyes, and at least in the US. You go to Metro, their cheapest non-flip phone is $120, or maybe even free if you activate with them. This happens at T-Mobile, Verizon, etc. Also, don't go to Metro or Cricket, just trust me on that one. There are deals that companies offer that give you a better phone for cheap or even free. But that doesn't apply to every country, and this Vivo isn't from or even for America, especially in the budget section. For example, this phone is from Tim in Italy, and for some reason they don't sell this phone anymore, but Amazon Italy has it for 128 to 135 euros, which is honestly 135 euros more than I would spend on this phone. But ultimately, 135 euros for this phone that will last you a while is a pretty good price, especially if you need it for calls and texts, which should be the main goal of a budget phone. But these aren't made for games, though they can play them, just like with photography and videography, but the price is what really bothers me. Now, I believe there are a few situations where a budget phone makes sense, and that's generally for people that break their phone a lot or just don't use them. But that's also where the budget phone kind of confuses me. I can see this being a phone that I could give to like a grandparent, but it just falls apart. Sure, the screen is large and so is the battery, but the processor is astonishingly slow and just horrible to use. I have the Essential phone, which came out in 2017, and the processor is still dramatically faster and even more responsive just overall. Battery life is about a day, maybe even longer, just like the Vivo. With light usage, it's possible to get 2 to 3 days of battery life out of both phones, so that's no problem there. But the price is a big deal, right? Well, you can buy the Vivo new for whatever it costs, which ends up being about $200 or more because I have to import this phone because I do live in America. Maybe it's a bad example, but even with the A02s, or I guess the A03, it would still be a much better deal and maybe even cheaper for me to buy this Essential phone that runs under the $100 price tag, though you would be buying it used. And that's where a budget phone only really makes sense in the fact that you're generally buying a phone new and at a store, while an older flagship phone is used and generally online, or in some random stores possibly. Also software, with this Vivo getting Android 12, but I really wouldn't consider that too much because most budget phones get security updates and little to no major software updates. Sure, the S9 and Essential phone are stuck with Android 10, but on a budget phone, if the performance is terrible, the software really doesn't matter. And that's why I never recommend budget options because no one should ever have to suffer waiting so long to do basic stuff. I was testing this battery on the Vivo, and after 2 hours of YouTube play, this phone just slowed down and glitched so much it was almost impossible to really do anything. Now I understand that America has some of the best options with some of the cheapest versions of a phone, like $1,000 iPhone costing $1,400 or even more in other countries, and the availability of sites like Amazon and eBay or even Swappa. But does that mean that other countries should suffer through this? I started this video because I was going to review this Vivo phone because I don't really review budget phones, but it made me realize of how much of a waste this phone is. Also, that I'm not really capable of reviewing budget phones because my reviews will be super biased because I'm so used to flagship phones. Another reason why I bring up older flagship phones is just because it's better on the environment to use a used one over a new one. The companies that make these phones rarely ever use recycled materials, which is generally reserved for premium phones. But the best recycling that you can do is to not even buy a new product. I try my best to either keep or resell the phones that I use, with the exception of new ones that I have to buy new, in theory, like the iPhone 14 Pro. But phones like the iPhone 13 mini, Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, Pixel 4 XL, and 4, sure, were all new at some point, but I've given them a new life with my usage, or really lack of overall. Then phones like the Essential Phone, S10e, and OnePlus 5, those were all refurbished by myself, again, bringing new life into them without having to just buy a new phone. So not only do you get a better phone from buying used, you're supporting the environment and also getting an experience that makes you actually enjoy using that phone. Now, if you're in a country that doesn't offer services like eBay to buy used phones at reasonable prices, then I don't really know how to help other than just looking at higher quality devices instead of spending hundreds of dollars on a phone just to buy another one next year because this one just falls apart. Or, like this Vivo, sucks. But if you're in a country where used phones are available, check them out. I mean, I reviewed the Pixel 6 and Motorola Edge Plus 2020, phones that are literally 30 to 50% of their original phone price 1 to 2 years later. Don't get trapped into thinking that a cheap phone is the best because in a lot of cases, you pay for what you get and generally it sucks. And yes, I know that the subject can be out of touch because people buy what they can afford, but I also learned that if it's all you can afford, maybe it's not the right time to purchase that. And things like food, cars, and tech are generally cheap for a reason. But what do you think? What's your experience with budget phones? Am I out of my mind thinking that you should buy old premium phones, or do companies actually make good sub $200 phones? Let me know what you think, and as always, thanks for watching.